1928, inside the heavy, locked walls of Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, a man sat in silence. A guard, out of curiosity more than compassion, handed him a pencil and some paper. The man took it without a word. Over the next several weeks, he filled page after page with his memories, his thoughts, his crimes, his beliefs. It would become one of the darkest confessions in American history. The man had no desire for pity, no illusions of redemption. He simply wanted the world to know what he had done, and why. That man was Carl Panzram, and what he wrote wasn't a cry for help. It was a manifesto of hate. Carl was born in 1891 in rural Minnesota. He was raised on a struggling farm in a time when children were expected to act like adults long before they were ready. His father left the family early on. His mother, burdened and exhausted, had little time or warmth to offer her son. By age 7, Carl was already getting into trouble. Petty thefts, fights, breaking into houses. By age 11, he was drinking. That same year, he was sent to a reform school for what authorities called incorrigible behavior. What happened in that school changed him forever. According to Carl, it was a place not of education, but of punishment, where discipline crossed into cruelty. The goal wasn't to help children, it was to break them. He would later describe the experience as the moment something inside him turned off. He stopped believing in people, stopped trusting anyone, and began to feel something darker take root: resentment, and eventually, hatred. He once wrote, "I was taught how to lie, how to hate, and how to hurt." By his teenage years, he was constantly on the run, jumping trains, stealing whatever he could, getting arrested under fake names, then disappearing before authorities could figure out who he was. He became a drifter, traveling from state to state, always angry, always armed with a chip on his shoulder. But unlike most criminals, Carl wasn't stealing to survive. He stole because he enjoyed it. He broke into homes not just for the money, but for the thrill, and sometimes for revenge. One of his early targets was the home of a former US president. Yes, Carl broke into the home of William Howard Taft, stole money, valuables, and even a pistol. He later used the stolen funds to buy a boat, an actual yacht, which he used to cruise up and down the East Coast. But this boat wasn't for sightseeing. According to Carl, it became a mobile crime scene. He would lure people on board with promises of work or shelter, only for them to vanish without a trace. Many of these disappearances were never connected to him at the time, but later he would describe them in vivid detail in his written confession. Over the years, Carl traveled far beyond the US. He drifted through Mexico, Europe, and Africa, always under different names. In each new place, the pattern repeated: theft, violence, then disappearance. He claimed to have committed crimes in at least a dozen countries. Most were never verified, but the consistency of his stories, the specific locations, the eerie timelines, they all suggest that at the very least, he wasn't fabricating everything. He was arrested numerous times, under dozens of aliases, but every time he was locked up, he found a way to escape. In one instance, he bent the metal bars of his jail cell using just his body weight and brute force. In another, he faked cooperation long enough to steal the keys from a guard. He was like a ghost, appearing in one city, vanishing the next, and with every escape, he seemed to grow bolder, more ruthless, and more committed to his personal mission, to cause as much chaos as possible. Eventually, though, even Carl ran out of luck. In 1928, after being arrested for burglary in Washington, D.C., he was finally identified and sentenced to a long prison term at Leavenworth. And this time, Something was different. Maybe he knew he wouldn't get out. Maybe he didn't want to. He started to open up, not to the prison system, but to a young guard named Henry Lesser, who treated him like a human being. Henry gave him writing supplies and asked him to tell his story. What came out was more than just a memoir. It was a psychological profile of a man who had completely disconnected from society. He wrote candidly, with no apologies. He described his crimes not as mistakes, but as choices. He explained how he had come to see life as a game of power, where causing pain was the only thing that ever made him feel alive. "I don't believe in man, God, nor the devil," he wrote. "I hate the whole damn human race." In one of the last chapters of his life, Carl committed a final act of violence inside the prison walls. A dispute with a staff member turned deadly, and Carl was sentenced to death. When asked if he wanted to appeal, he refused. When asked if he had any last words, he said something so cold and casual that even the guards were stunned. "Hurry it up. I could have done this myself." On September 5th, 1930, Carl Panzram was executed by hanging. He was 39 years old. His story faded into obscurity for decades, until the manuscript he left behind was finally published. It's now regarded by criminologists and historians as one of the most unfiltered looks into the mind of a career criminal. What makes it so chilling isn't just what Carl did, it's how self-aware he was about it. He knew exactly what he had become. He chose it. He embraced it. What do we do with stories like his? It's easy to label Carl Panzram as pure evil, but when you peel back the layers, the story becomes more complicated and more unsettling. Here was a person shaped by cruelty who became cruel in return, a child hurt by systems that claimed to be protecting him, who grew up to hurt others without remorse. It's a cycle we still see today, in different forms, in different places. He claimed to have killed 21 people. Some believe the number is even higher. But Carl Panzram didn't keep trophies. He didn't hide bodies. He didn't care if he got caught. He once said, "For all these things, I am not in the least bit sorry." His only regret was that he hadn't killed more. In the early 1920s, as America was roaring with jazz clubs, prohibition, and the rise of the gangster, Carl Panzram was operating like something far darker, an invisible predator slipping through cities like a shadow. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't looking for fame. He was driven by something else entirely, destruction for its own sake. There's one story, barely mentioned in official reports, that stuck with those who study his life. In 1920, somewhere near New York, Carl lured a young sailor to his yacht, the same yacht he'd bought using stolen money from Taft's house. The boy was looking for work. Carl offered him food, drink, and a bunk for the night. By morning, he was gone. Carl claimed he killed him, tied a weight to the body, and dumped it into the Atlantic. When asked why, his answer was simple. He was there. That's what made Carl so terrifying. There was no pattern, no motive in the traditional sense. He didn't kill out of passion or fear or even gain. He killed because he wanted to. He once bragged that his only pleasures in life were sexual assaults, robbery, and murder. And he meant it. He sexually assaulted men. That part of his story is often left out because it's uncomfortable, too disturbing even for true crime. But Carl was clear about it. In his own words, he committed hundreds of assaults. He said it gave him power, control. He used sex as a weapon, and he saw no difference between physical violence and psychological terror. It was all the same currency to him. In Africa, He worked for a time as a labor overseer in Angola, under an alias. What he did there is mostly guesswork, because local authorities didn't record crimes committed by foreigners in those days. But Carl claimed he once hired 6 local men to help with manual labor. He led them deep into the bush, shot each one in the back, and left their bodies for the animals. Why? Because he wanted to see if he could get away with it. And he did. He always did. That's what's so haunting about Carl Panzram. For almost 2 decades, moved through the world unchecked. America, Mexico, the UK, France, even parts of India. He left traces in all of them. Sometimes a stolen item, sometimes a body. But he always kept moving, always under a new name, always just one step ahead of whatever system was supposed to catch men like him. And then there's the fire. One night in the early 1920s, Carl set an entire oil refinery ablaze in New Jersey, just because it made him angry to look at. He hated industry. He hated capitalism. He hated the idea that some men could live comfortably, while others, like him, were chewed up by the system and spat out. So he burned it down. No arrests, no suspects. The insurance company blamed faulty wiring. It was Carl. In his writings, there's a chilling passage where he talks about how easily he could have become something much bigger. He said if he'd had more education, more resources, he would have made explosives, planted bombs, and wiped out entire cities. Not for a cause, not for politics, just to watch the world burn. His words, not mine. He wrote, "If you people had what it takes to see the inside of me, you'd hang me 1,000 times." But maybe the most disturbing part of all this is that he wasn't insane. He wasn't delusional. Every word in his manuscript is articulate, deliberate. It's not the rambling of a madman. It's the manifesto of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't care who got hurt. Some psychiatrists later speculated that he might have had antisocial personality disorder, maybe even psychopathy. But Carl rejected all that. He didn't blame his brain, he blamed people. He said, "I was no different than any other boy, but I was treated like an animal, and I became one." It's impossible to say how much of his story is true. Carl was a liar, by trade and by instinct. But the way he tells the story, the consistency, the detail, the lack of exaggeration in places where you'd expect it, it has the cold ring of truth. There's a passage where he talks about being whipped in reform school as a child, how they'd beat him with leather straps soaked in salt water, how they'd tie him to a wooden board and leave him in the basement for hours. He said the only thing he learned from school was how to hate the people who ran it. He once wrote, "Every time they beat me, I got tougher. Every time they punished me, I learned how to hide what I was becoming." And what he became was a storm, one man against the world. It's worth noting that Carl had no close friends, no partners, no gang. He worked alone, always. That's rare in the world of crime. Even the worst serial killers usually have someone they trust, someone who helps them hide. Carl had no one. He wanted no one. And in some twisted way, that made him even more dangerous. Even his final friendship, if you can call it that, was strange. Henry Lesser, the guard who gave him the pencil and paper, saw something human in him. Maybe he thought he could reach Carl, maybe even change him. But Carl made it clear he wasn't interested in changing. He only wrote because it gave him something to do before he died. And yet, he did open up. He told Henry things he'd never told anyone else. That's why the manuscript exists. It was written in secret, over several months, while the other prisoners rotted in their cells. Carl would scratch his thoughts out late at night, then hide the pages under his mattress. When he filled one sheet, Henry would smuggle in another. And slowly, Carl built a document unlike anything else in American criminal history. A raw, unfiltered account of one man's descent into total nihilism. In it, he ends with a line that has haunted readers for decades. He wrote, "I have no desire to reform myself. My only desire is to reform people who tried to reform me." He didn't believe in good or evil or redemption. To him, the world was a meat grinder, and he was just playing his part. So what do we do with stories like Carl Panzram's? Most people never heard about him. He doesn't get documentaries. He's too brutal for pop culture, too messy for redemption arcs. But his story matters because it's real, because it shows what happens when a child is thrown away, when every institution that's supposed to protect you instead breaks you, and because it proves that sometimes the monsters we fear are the ones we create. Carl wasn't a product of the underworld. He wasn't some mythical beast. He was born on a quiet farm in Minnesota. He was a child once. He liked dogs. He played in fields. Then life taught him that trust was weakness and kindness was bait. And he listened. At the end of his life, standing at the gallows, the prison chaplain asked him to repent. Carl spat in his face. The hangman asked if he had any last words. Carl looked him in the eye and said, "Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier scum. I could kill 10 men while you're fooling around." And then the trapdoor opened. He died exactly how he lived, defiant, angry, and utterly alone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.